Test, test. Hello? Hello? Can you hear us in the back? Logan, can you hear us? No? Logan, can you hear me? A little louder, maybe?
Ruani, Squagekekwe, Tekpatolin Indigenakas, Detroit and Donjaba, Mashikakwe and Dao, Linse, Newat Natoka Siwachitokli at Tekpatolin. Hello, welcome. Thank you for being here. Tlasokamati, Miigwech for being here. My name is Eliza Perez Olin. I'm with the Detroit Equity Action Lab, one of the partners that has helped design this course that was founded by U of M, Semester in Detroit. And they've asked us, the Detroit Equity Action Lab at the Damon J. Key Center for Civil Rights at Wayne State, as well as the African American Studies Department at Wayne State to partner on this class. This is our third year. And we're very excited to welcome you to Detroiter Speaks. I just introduced myself to you in both Ojibwe and Nahuatl. Ojibwe is one of the major languages that is indigenous to the territory that we're in. So we're in Ojibwe people's territory right now. And in a few minutes, we'll get to have the opportunity to hear from a brilliant Ojibwe mind who will help center us on the fact that Detroit was already a settled city before anyone from Europe got here, that already had folks living here, complex trading systems, complex relationships, governance systems. So Christy B will be up next to just ground you in that a little bit. So when we talk about the city, we want to remember that there was a city here before Detroit that was referred to in many languages. One of them was Wawiatanang, or the river bends. This is a meeting place for many, many nations. Before we get to that, I want to introduce our team, just to let you know this is a collaborative effort, and a lot of people have been working hard for months to put it together. And so you'll see our work throughout the evening, and you'll be supported by our work. So just asking everybody to say their name and title and affiliation.
Hi everyone, my name is Aisha Jamali. I work with the Detroit Equity Action Lab. It's been almost a year, and I'm a communications and messaging specialist.
Good evening. My name is Dario Goodwin, and I am the event coordinator for the Detroit Equity Action Lab.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Craig Register. I'm the Associate Director for Semester in Detroit, Program Adjunct Faculty Member at U of M Ann Arbor.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Ward. I teach in the Department of Afro-American and African Studies and in the Residential College at U of M, and I'm the Faculty Director of the Semester in Detroit program.
Hi everyone, my name is Marion Van Dam, and I'm the program coordinator for Semester in Detroit.
My name is David Goldberg, and I teach African American Studies at Wayne State.
Good evening, I'm Mama Lila, and I'm the curriculum consultant for the DEAL program.
Thank you. So if we could just get a round of applause, thank you. Hello, Christy Beaver.
Hello everyone, how you doing? Nice. So, bonjour everyone, my name's Christy. I've been here a couple of times, but as Eliza said, just welcome to Anishinaabe territory, which it is contemporarily, but as she was sharing, like, with the waterways, this has just been a historical space for many indigenous nations to come together and build. So we've been a people that have, built with other nations for a long time. So I tend to be more of like a spiritual person. So I don't know, I'm not a history book, so I don't know many facts about that stuff. So what I wanted to do tonight was to share a traditional story. So it's snowing out, and winter is when we are allowed to share our stories, which sounds kind of strange. But it's not because, you can get by a campfire and be all cuddly and tell stories. It actually has a spiritual significance why we do that. So this is an Arazokan, which means it's a sacred story. and they're only shared in winter because how many people have had a story told by their parents that was really embarrassing? Yeah. But usually when our parents say those stories, that's usually because we're so innocent and endearing, right? And they probably learned something from a child, so they just want to share that stuff. So similarly, that's why we share our stories in winter, because most of the animals and the spirits are asleep during this time or in hibernation, because we just don't want to embarrass them all the time. If you do tell a story like out of line with those rules though, the consequences are light, you know, like that embarrassing feeling, that moment, that can be corrected. So that's just a tiny piece of culture. But yeah, I just wanted to share this story. I think I'm probably gonna have to summarize it because Native people can just go on, especially with stories. But basically, when you hear these stories, just think about like spiritual significance that you hear, but also these stories taught a lot about governance and how our societies were constructed, how we built systems and how we functioned together, how we loved each other, how we built together. So think about those things when you hear this story as well. So this story is about the Gadiga Bijuak, which are bobcats, which are in Michigan. It's pretty cool. So one Ziguan, long time ago, this story takes place a long time ago. And this story is about Elder Brother, who's kind of like a trickster. He's like basically representing humanity. Like he fumbles a lot and he teaches us a lot of lessons. So Elder Brother is out visiting, and he's walking all over Anishinaabe, or basically this land, this beautiful land, to visit all the animals and all the clans and all the people. And he goes to where the bobcats are supposed to be, but he can't find them anywhere. So he's looking, he doesn't see the bobcats or the bobcat babies. There's no fish smoking, which is what they're supposed to be doing. There's no fires, no shkode, there's no wood piles even, empty dens. So Elder Brother knows something's really wrong because the bobcats are nowhere to be found. And he starts kind of freaking out. He's walking and looking for them everywhere and nothing. He finds nothing and he starts to feel a little nervous. So he tells himself, calm down, just breathe, figure it out. And he starts yelling, Gadiga Bijuak. No answer. Gadiga Bijuak. There's still no answer. So he just keeps looking and looking. Maybe it was for days, maybe weeks, but not much longer than that, right? And he starts to see something out on the tree line, the nanat-to-go, because that means trees. And it looks funny out there. It just doesn't look normal. Kind of looks kind of blurry, kind of fuzzy. So he goes out there and he finds Gadiga Bijuak out there. And they're laying flat on their backs. And their mouths are open by the trees. And they're basically eating maple syrup. Right, so this is in a magical time when maple trees just give off maple syrup. Like you didn't have to do any work, it just comes like that. So all the Gadiga Bijuak are just laying on their backs, just drinking syrup, having a good time. So that's what he finds. But this is not good because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And as you can imagine, there's many other problems with just drinking syrup all day. So he goes to Nokomis, which is Grandma. He's like, Grandma will know what to do, I'll go see her. But when he gets there, he gets all distracted because, I don't know if you guys, when you go to your grandma's house, how it might be, but like, just chilling. Maybe she's got some soup. He just wants to like, have a blanket. So he forgets all about the problem, of course, and he's chilling with his grandma. But finally he remembers the problem and asks Nokomis what to do. So she tells him, come on, we gotta go, we gotta get to work. And basically what she does is she takes him out on this long path. He's got to go through the cold and learn how to tap maple trees, right? So she teaches him how to put the shunt in the tree and hang a little bucket on there to gather the sap, right? So then she tells Elder Brother to taste the sap. And he thinks it's maple syrup because that's how the trees are, right? But he tastes it and he's like, ew, this is so gross. It tastes like nabish, which is water. He's like, this is nasty. And basically, what she does next is tells them to bring that out to those Gadiga Bijuak, all the bobcats, so that they can learn their lesson, right? And they're kind of joking around. They're like, man, it smells, or it tastes like tree pea, something like that. So what he does is he like climbs up to the top of the trees, basically, and pours this bucket of sap all on the trees. So now the trees are giving off sap now, no more maple syrup. And all the Gadiga Bijuak are like getting out because they're like, oh, this is nasty. So basically they stop, and then elder brother gathers them all around this fire, and he basically has a heart-to-heart with them. Because he was feeling bad because he's like, maybe it was because I was spending too much time with the other animals. I was playing with the wolves for a really long time and I neglected the Gadiga Bijuak. So he was just saying like, sorry for doing that, and just like how much he appreciated them for their hard work. Because they do that for their communities, right? They hold those fires every year and they boil that sap down and they bring that to their community. That's their role. So yeah, elder brother was just telling them how much he appreciated them and just reminding them of their duties. But yeah, that's basically the story. Did anything stick out for you guys that you could see that would teach a lesson about anything? Maybe like 4 thoughts. Oh yeah.
It just felt really transformative to hear how, like, elder brother was saying, instead of like having it be punitive or a punishment that they were doing what they're doing, instead of that, it's expressing gratitude.
Mm-hmm. Any other things that stuck out? Yeah.
That everyone in the community counts, and you have to focus on everyone, not just a certain group.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts? There's just so many things in these stories. They're so cool. I love them. Yeah.
I like the way that Nokam is taught by doing, so she didn't even say anything, she just taught by doing.
Yeah, I love that part too. The story is like way longer, and like elder brother wants to have a party, and she's all like, "Why don't you party down the path and get to work?" So it's just like got all these funny parts. But elder brother just wants to chill and have a party. But yeah, Nokabis doesn't like get mad at him. He just like makes a joke and like just reminds him of responsibility by doing, which is super cool. Cool. So yeah, I don't know, just think, oh yeah.
What stood out to me is the gift that you're giving us by sharing the story. Because indigenous people are very invisible in our community. And there's not relationship that would allow people to hear those stories. So there's a lot of cultural misunderstanding about the indigenous people. And that story is very, very valuable from the aspect of learning across cultures and noticing the relationships that are missing. And the young lady's comment back in the corner about everybody counts. We live in a community where everybody counts. We live in a nation where everybody counts.
Thank you so much. You got.
So we thank you for the gift.
And thank you guys for this. Yeah, I think just the last thought is just like, Arazokan means a story that transcends time, and like, yeah, just like thinking about it, it's an old story. So like, what do you think our people got from it a long time ago, and what do you think they're getting from it today? Because like she said, like we still have a rich culture that's just one of so many stories that we know fully translated in our whole language. Like it's not gone or anything like that, but it doesn't get to be shared a lot. And yeah, so I appreciate being here. I appreciate getting to do something different. So thank you guys for listening to me. Watch.
Did you have a question for Christy? Christy Bieber?
Christy Bieber?
Yep.
Thank you, Christy.
If you want to know anything else about me or my work, ask anyone, Eliza or Craig. But yeah, thank you.
I'd be happy to share. Christy's an amazing cultural worker, a singer, works in film, works in hip hop, works in storytelling, works with youth, works in gardens, does a lot of building in Southwest Detroit and around the entire, Detroit area and beyond. We wanted to also welcome Baba Darrell, who is one of the directors of this space that we're in, the physical building, and the concept that we're in of being in the Commons. So we wanted to ask you to come share some words and welcome us.
Hey, good evening, everybody. How you doing? Good. Come on, speak up. You're at the Commons. You know what the Commons is? Commons is a space that belongs to the people. It belongs to all of us. And so I want to welcome you to the Commons. My house is your house. That means that feel free to come and participate in the kinds of activities that go on here. If I'm getting serious now. This house is your house just like it's mine. If you see some trash on the floor, don't be too shy about picking it up. If you see something that needs to be done, you might as well do it because you're doing it as good as me doing it. This is your house too. And I know it sounds really crazy, but the world that we're trying to create and the world that we're moving to is that world that belongs to all of us. And if we don't take care of that world and if we don't take care of each other, we're going to be in bad shape. Now, some real quick stuff that you really might need to know. The bathrooms are back there in the hall. And if you need to step outside, smoke or something, just go do it out there on top of the snow and the ice out there in the parking lot. You'll be all right. No, I'm just joking. But I want to tell you that the Commons is the home of EMEAC, East Michigan Environmental Action Council. We're also a gathering place for a whole lot of important work that's going on in the city. From the Independent Freedom School movement to the Detroit People's Water Board to the right now organizing for the Poor People's Campaign. There's a lot going on. So if you got a little bit of time in your agenda, we got some ways to use that time. So I'm going to get off this, move now and just tell you all to just get comfortable, make yourselves at home, and enjoy the program. I know it's going to be a good one.
Thanks, Darrell. And Ed, is Ed in the room too? You'll see Ed around as well. Ed works with Darrell and other people here at the Commons to keep the place organized and to keep us organized. And so we'll thank Ed and Sawatu and others as well. My name is Craig Register. I'm just going to say a couple things about Detroiters Speak, a little bit of the background for it, just in a couple minutes, and then...
Can I just interrupt? The people who are standing, there's about 6 seats over here. If you want to come and sit.
Yeah, there's chairs down here.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Come on.
Yeah, there's a few more back here as well. So if you're looking for a seat, as Mama Lila said, there's almost 10 back here we can make real quick. So I just wanted to say a couple things about Detroiters Speak. For how many of you is this the first time you've been here for a Detroiters Speak class? Raise your hand nice and high just to get a sense of it. So maybe a little bit more than half the room. And for the rest of you, welcome back. We've been doing this, as Eliza said, semester in Detroit for about 5 years. Detroiters Speak. It used to be down at U of M Detroit Center, and we have since relocated happily to this space, which, as you can see, is a wonderful, warm space, as Darrell described to you. And I just wanted to say a couple things about the background. When you got the introductions at the beginning, you saw there were many people involved. It takes a lot of people to put this together. And actually, most of us, certainly me and others who are speaking tonight, you probably won't hear much from us for the rest of the semester. We'll be running around doing various things to keep it going. But it takes a lot of people to do it. And so it's just worth mentioning and acknowledging that. It's also, there's kind of two sort of philosophies behind the course that may be obvious, but I just kind of want to underline them too. One is, and perhaps most importantly, in the name, Detroiters Speak. And just let that soak in for a minute. Of course, you immediately want to go, well, what is a Detroiter? And that's its own conversation. We could probably spend many evenings just talking about that. I think what I want to sort of project forward, and perhaps it's obvious to you, is we want to uplift and underline and put in front of the room and all around the room, the voices and perspectives and experiences of Detroiters. And that's something that you will see tonight. It's something you'll see throughout the course. Some of the Detroiters you'll hear from have PhDs. Some of the Detroiters don't have PhDs. And as far as we're concerned, it doesn't make any difference because the knowledge and expertise and experience that comes forward in these conversations stands on its own merits and without the credentials and the credentializing of the university. So we don't really care too much about that, to be honest. And so the experts that you all bring and the expertise that you all bring from your own experience into the room is what we want to uplift. And it's not just the people in the front of the room on these beautiful couches and chairs, but it's also the Detroiters in the audience, right? And so Detroiters speak. We really take that seriously. Does that mean everybody who speaks is always going to be a so-called Detroiter? No, because we also want Metro Detroiters to speak and Ann Arborites to speak and out-of-state people to speak as well. But we really say that at the beginning of each class, Detroiters speak, because that is the impetus and the emphasis and the sort of philosophy and pedagogy behind these gatherings. So that's point number one. Point number two is that this is a community classroom. So it's our classroom, but it's also open to anybody. And so you may be registered at Wayne State, you may be registered at U of M. At least half the room is probably not registered and long ago stopped registering for classes, thank goodness, and paying for tuition. But it's just here because they want to be here. And it's a public community classroom. So as you can see, we're going to have to bring more chairs next week. But when you leave tonight, make sure you grab a poster and a little flyer, a couple of those half sheets, because we want you to bring the community into this classroom. You're already here. Again, what is community? We could talk about that too. But in general, we just want you to understand these are public events or community classrooms. We need you to spread the word as well. So we'd like to have to move into the sanctuary at some point where we have 500 people gathering because we've grown out of this room. And so please help us do that. And then lastly, I'll just say, we don't always have such a nice spread of food. Sorry. Thanks to Darielle. That was a joke. Nobody laughed. So next week we're going to have pizza, just to bring it down. Now, there was pizza tonight. I just want to clarify something. The vegetarians for tonight, there was a slight mix-up with our caterer, and they were supposed to have vegetarian sandwiches too. And Patrick's not feeling that at all. He's like, thumbs down, I gotcha. And so sometimes there's a glitch, right? And that happens. And so again, you have to remember that a lot of work is put into this. We do our best. I don't think you've ever been to a class in your life where you got a dinner before it. So you're just going to have to work with us. We'll work with you. And it's a part of the spirit and culture of this classroom and the community aspect to it, is we want you to feel welcome. And so we're going to keep bringing back food. It won't always look this nice, but it'll always nourish you. And we promise that. So there's probably a few things I missed, but I just wanted to thank you all for being here and turn it over to the main event for tonight. And my colleague, I want to mention in the back of the room, Marion, is also very much involved. You see Marion back there and everything that we're doing. And I forgot one final thing, which is one of the people who really put this course together over the years and put a whole heck of a lot of work into it is a really good friend of mine and colleague, and her name is Lolita Hernandez, and she's sitting right there. So she's not going to stand, but Lolita put years into developing this class model, and it's really important to acknowledge that for us because we've had to build on that, and it's been a great foundation that you set for us, Lolita, so thank you. And so I think parking, the fun part. So if you didn't know this, parking, last thing, it's a little tougher on here. Right across the street, just north of here, is a Wayne State University lot. It's lot number 60. You don't have to pay to use that lot. So in the future, if you had a hard time finding parking, just go right off of Cass here, just north of Forest, turn left into lot 60, and let the attendant know, I'm here for Detroiters Speak. And they'll check off your name or do something, and you won't have to pay, okay? So if we didn't get that information to you before tonight, we apologize, but in the future, and tell your friends too that come, if they want to park easily, there's plenty of space right there, and you just have to walk across the street, okay? Did I miss anything else? No?
That's going south or north?
I think I'm pointing north, yes. I could be wrong, but just, so basically at the corner of Forest and Cass, there's a lot number 60, Wayne State University lot, okay?
Is that the one by Hilbury? Or?
Yes, you go up the
Yes,
driveway.
by the Hillberry, right across from the Shangri-La restaurant, right across the street. Okay, so I'm done. That's the housekeeping. Who am I handing the mic to, Eliza? That's why I'm looking at you. Who do I give the mic to now? Stephen. Excellent. And David. All right, I'm surrounded. Okay.
We're gonna hold the mic at the same time and then drop it together at the same time. Now we're going to play, man. Okay, hello everybody. Hello everybody. That's from a movie called Wild Style. Just having the relevance here. When it came to my mind.
The Warriors come out and play.
Warriors.
Steven, hold the mic close this week.
Hold the mic like this,
There you go.
so you couldn't hear what I said before, which is probably best. So, David and I will spend a few minutes with some context, background, and framing of the class. So Craig just told you about the concept of the class overall. We'll talk specifically now about this particular iteration of it, this next 8-week session. Who remembers the title of the class?
Detroit or speak.
Detroit or Speak. Okay, subtitle. The subtitle and the subtitle. From two societies to a new society. Revisiting the Kerner Report and People's Movement for the Future of Detroit. So the class is really about examining or highlighting different ideas, experiences, organizations, programs that in various ways are trying to envision and create the future of Detroit. And we're using something called the Kerner Report as a starting point to launch us into that investigation. How many have heard of the Kerner Report? What would you say, David? What was that like?
About 25%.
About 25%, 1/4? All right. I saw one person who raised his hand and he made it. There was some expression of recognition on his face, talking about Carl Gregory, who, as some others in the room too, Carl certainly was around for some of this context we're going to be talking about. So, the Kerner Report, that's its street name. It's not its government name. It's not its government name. The government name of this document is the Report of the National Commission on Civil Disorders. So this is a government report that was issued in March of 1968. So in less than a month, it was the beginning of March. In less than a month will be exactly 50 years since the issuing of this report. And this report has been taken as a statement of that historical moment, the late 1960s, about cities and race and black people in particular in cities. From that moment up and throughout this 50 years, it has been taken as a powerful statement about the intersection, the interconnections of cities and the state of our cities. And we should pause here and make the point that while now today in Detroit especially, but in cities throughout the country, we see them, they are understood as places of black and brown residents. In other words, the cities are places that have majority or a high proportion of black and brown populations. But that has not always been the case. And in fact, in that moment, in 1968, in the late 60s, was when that association came into being. So, associating cities with black people and with racial conflict, racial tension, was relatively new in that historical moment. And this report was investigating that. And it said some powerful things, and it said some things that have been consistently cited in discussions about cities, the state of cities, the future of cities, with race and the presence of black people in particular at the center of that. And that's in part where the title of our program comes from Two Societies. And if you notice, two societies is in quotation marks. Now, that phrase, two societies, has some resonance with experiences and discussions of Detroit today, right?
To Detroit.
Gracias. Yes, to Detroit. So that exact language, two societies, is from the Kerner Report, but it has some resonance with discussion of two Detroits today. Is anyone familiar with that statement, where the two society statement comes from?
Not all at once. We can't keep track of the hands, everybody. Come on.
Okay, I'm coming back to that, but side question. How many people have seen the Eyes on the Prize documentary, some parts of the Eyes on the Prize documentary series? Which has several components. How many have seen the one that focuses on the Detroit Rebellion of 1967? And that's actually the second half. The first half deals with King and SCLC in Chicago. And the second half, remember the title of that segment? Two Societies. And it comes from this often quoted statement from the very beginning of the Kerner report. It's a long 400-something page document. They have a 30-page summary towards the beginning of it, summarizing the whole report. And in the very beginning it says, this is our basic conclusion, the commissioners who wrote this report. This is our basic conclusion, that our society is moving towards two societies, one white, one black, separate and unequal. So in 1968, they said that our society was moving towards two societies. One white, one black, separate and unequal. As the titling of the Eisner Price segment indicates, and many other times, that phrase has been used. It's been cited as a statement of profundity, in other words, a profound statement, and of prophecy, that is prophetic. I'd like to encourage us to question that. And in fact, I'll even assert respectfully, but boldly, that that was a ridiculous statement for them to make.
I don't know how that's respectful.
Well, I failed there. I tried to put some gravity in my voice to make it sound respectful. So, again, over and over we hear two societies, that statement. And I'm suggesting that for them to say that in 1968 was ridiculous. I'll leave it at that for now, except to say this, that the state of where we were in the country, in terms of, and they're talking about in terms of black and white now, we know that the racial, multiracial, multi-ethnic society that we have and do live in is not only black and white, but that was their focus and their limited range. In the history of black people in this country, it's any day before they said that, you might say, also was described as separate and unequal. So, the reason why I think I said that, the logic underlying that, was that they were looking at the role of cities. And cities, up until that point, in American society, have been seen as places of opportunity and of engines of upward mobility, as the ladder, the place where the ladder of people climb to realize the American dream. And I'm putting all those in quotes and saying that's mythical, but that was the role that cities occupied and were understood, the role they were understood to play. But at this moment, in the mid and late 60s, they were seen as not able to do that. Instead, they were seen as the location, the cauldron of racial conflict, which previous to that had been seen in the southern part of the United States. Also was misrepresentation. But for the powers that be, they were now seeing that cities were in this huge crisis. They weren't able to provide opportunity. In fact, they were the place where racial conflict and violence seemed to be proliferating. And the reason they felt that was because of the so-called long, hot summers, which David will talk about in a moment. Who's familiar with that phrase, long, hot summers? Anyone want to throw out what does that refer to? When and when?
Summer 67.
I thought someone was going to say during the summer. That would have been a good response. Summer of 67, and in particular, yes, starting in the summer of 1964, there were these urban rebellions, what the mainstream society and people in power and the news media called riots. In 67, after previous summers, in 67 had Newark, several, and then Newark, and then Detroit in July. And it was in fact during Detroit's uprising, on the 27th of July, that President Johnson created this commission. Commission on Civil Disorders. And the language they used was civil disorders rather than riot or rebellion, or uprising. And a few months later, in March of 68, they issued that report. What we'd like to do now is play a few minutes of a CBS News report program from March of 1968, a day or two after the issuing of this report, to give you a sense of how mainstream news media and society was engaging this report. So this is a program called Remedy for Riot. And the version...
This is Harry Reisner. For the last few days, this country has lived under it.
1 second, please. It's language. So the program is called Remedy for Riot. It aired on March 3rd, 1968.
Excellent. Right.
And it was reporting on the Kerner Commission report. Something else. One of the reasons why this report has been lauded and been recognized is because it was very unique among these type of reports. Now, government reports, whether for a city or state or federal level, frequently happen, but this report was unique in that it identified racism, white racism, as an underlying cause of the uprisings and as an important problem to be tackled. Okay.
Charge of white racism, national in scale, terrible in its effects. The evidence to support that charge has now been presented. More than 1,400 pages of testimony, findings, conclusions, the full text of a report released just last night. These are the disturbing answers to the questions which the President asked for the nation in the heat and shock of last summer.
The civil peace has been shattered in a number of cities. The American people are deeply disturbed. They're baffled and dismayed by the wholesale looting and violence that has occurred both in small towns and in great metropolitan centers. No society can tolerate massive violence any more than a body can tolerate massive disease. And we in America shall not tolerate it. We need to know the answer, I think, to 3 basic questions about these riots. What happened? Why did it happen? What can be done to prevent it from happening again and again?
In their answers to those questions, the President's Special Commission on Civil Disorders has confronted the American people with a new shock to our national sense of well-being, a shock and a warning. Our nation, says the report, is moving toward 2 separate societies, black and white, separate but unequal. If the division is allowed to widen, it says, we will find ourselves living in a state of tension and lawlessness held in check only by repression. In those words, the report summons up an image that is more like the other side of the Iron Curtain or the garrison states of Latin America than our image of the United States. In the riots of last summer, the Commission sees the whole shape of that danger. The violence of last summer, it says, was more white repression than Negro protest. There is only one hope, it says, of keeping disorder from taking over permanently, and that is to reverse the course of racism, which is its basic cause, to rub out the boundaries of the ghetto and relieve the poverty that breeds there. To do this in what the Commission calls a commitment to national action. It amounts to a national alliance of government and private resources, with the federal government taking the initiative on 4 basic problems: jobs, housing, schools, and welfare. In this broadcast, we will examine these proposals, the findings on which they are based, and the atmosphere in which this country faces the choice between commitment and disorder.
What we had to do is tell it like it is. We've been terribly alarmed and depressed by studying this problem for the last 7 months. And what we've tried to do in this report is to let people see this thing through our eyes and to feel it in the pit of their stomachs like we do. And then if they see what a crisis this really is, what a terribly serious crisis this is for our country, they could be a great deal more willing to try to move to do something about it.
This society believes that it can have its affluence and its injustice at the same time. And it will continue to believe this until it becomes excruciatingly clear that it's impossible. It will not. If we're going to judge from the past, it will not plan to eradicate slums. It will not allocate the resources to get rid of our ghettos. And to me, only this will prevent riots and instability for the future.
This is a CBS News special report on the findings and recommendations of the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders.
So let me chime in here. So you get the general gist of it, right, in terms of what they're trying to address and what the analysis was. Now, how do you imagine the American public and the body politic responded to this report, blaming racism and specifically white racism for the ills of American society moving forward? You know, I always find it fascinating how, you know, one of the political moves in this country is when something seemingly bad happens, they always take it to a commission, right, where it gets buried, right? And so what happened here is there are findings that are pretty, you know, path-breaking for the time, in the sense that liberal analysis shifted from the notion of racism as individual acts to an analysis of kind of structural, or what they called at the time, institutional racism. And of course, Johnson, who commissioned this report, right, would later ignore the findings so as to not deal with the issues of institutional racism, right? So they tabled the report and didn't do anything about them. And if anything, that is more suggestive to me of the urban crisis than anything in the report per se. I did want to kind of give you a backdrop to all this, because this report kind of emerges in response to, you know, the outbreak of urban rebellions that we had talked about before, but I wanted to give you a little bit about the scope of that. I always take issue with the, people tend to frame this really in terms of like urban rebellions from the period of 1964 to 1968 in particular, and they look at it as a northern urban phenomenon, but I would suggest to you that it's deeper than that, and ironically that it actually starts in the South, right? And it starts as a part of the civil rights movement. Right? I think if you look at it, the first kind of major urban uprising we see in the 1960s is in Birmingham in the wake of the Children's Crusade. Right? There were people that were definitely doing nonviolent direct action in Birmingham, and there were a bunch of people that were unwilling to commit to that kind of discipline of nonviolence. And when they started beating on school children, the people of Birmingham rebelled. Right? And that oftentimes gets tossed out of the mix. But a lot of these same dynamics, of course, impacted black lives not only in the North but also in the South. But so somebody mentioned before, as epicenter of the long hot summers, 1967. So just to give you a little data, in 1967 alone, 163 other towns and cities had uprisings. I think Saginaw and Flint that year as well, Benton Harbor. They had uprisings, including Newark, as Stephen mentioned, a week before Detroit, where 34 people were killed. To Wadesboro, North Carolina, small little town of 1,000. You had suburban areas in New Jersey, for example, as well as cities, large and industrial like Buffalo, and perhaps one that had the longest legacy of kind of racial turmoil, Cairo, Illinois, right on the border of the Mississippi River. But the period, if we ignore Birmingham, the period from 1964 produced 329 important uprisings in 257 cities. 52,629 persons were arrested for quote-unquote riot-related offenses. 8,371 people were injured, and 220 people were killed, most of whom were black civilians, right? In the case of Detroit, if you're familiar with the Detroit Rebellion, this includes 4-year-old Tanya Blanding, who was shot when National Guardsmen reported hearing sniper fire, probably from other National Guardsmen that were shooting out lights. They responded to a flick, they're paranoid, they responded to a flick of light in an apartment building, and they killed a 4-year-old girl. Right, that was one of many deaths that occurred like that in the Detroit Rebellion. Both these events that I've enumerated and the Detroit Rebellion were an outgrowth of years of protest. And of course, that's something that the Kerner Commission report is completely numb on, right? It acts as if they discovered something new. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to tell black people that were around in cities throughout the 60s that America was becoming two cities separate, or two nations separate, but an unequal, one black, one white. This was the reality that people had lived. And had white America, or liberal America in particular, been paying attention to the activities of activists in places like Detroit and cities throughout the country, they would have been well aware of the numerous problems that they wound up highlighting in the report, right? From housing to jobs to police discrimination and brutality, right? All these things were the focus of black activism in these cities previous, to this report, right? So black people weren't surprised, but white people were surprised, and they were particularly surprised that an uprising occurred nationwide in the city of Detroit. it's hard for many of younger people to consider this, right? Because most of your lives, you've grown up with this image of Detroit as this bombed out American Beirut, you know, but in the 1960s, Detroit was viewed, I always use this colloquially, they used to call Atlanta in the 70s under Maynard Jackson the city too busy to hate, right? I remember Baltimore when I lived there was the city that reads, right? But Detroit, many people thought, leading figures thought that Detroit was too busy to riot, right? And the idea is that there were a lot of good jobs here. We had the highest wages, we had the highest number of black home ownership in the country, right? And so they figured that of all places, Detroit was the one that was pretty much rebellion-proof. And tack on that, we had a liberal white mayor, right? Jerome Kavanaugh, who was considered to be like, you know, more progressive than Mayor Lindsay in New York. And Detroit had gotten a lot of money from the war on poverty, right? Johnson's war on poverty. So they thought it could never happen here. But of course, when it did happen, black leaders weren't surprised and black people weren't surprised. I just wanted to give you the layout, because we're going to talk about this in greater detail later. But during the Detroit Rebellion, it starts July 23rd at 3 in the morning when a blind pig gets raided. We'll talk about blind pigs, basically after-hours joint. 85 were initially arrested. The police raided a blind pig. They took everybody in paddy wagons. I always know him, they've named him now, but it's William Scott. I'll always affectionately refer to him as Greensleeves, because that's what he was known as for years. Threw a bottle through the back of a police car, smashed, and then it got everybody kind of like willing to fight against the police for raiding this bar. And people in the bar, of course, have been celebrating some of black veterans' return from Vietnam. Right, so this is kind of the climate in which this took place. And during the course of the rebellion, and I always mention this because it's fascinating for me as somebody that grew up here, is that I was always told that when I went throughout anywhere in the city, even if the rebellion didn't touch that part of the city, if there was an abandoned house, a bombed out house, a house on fire, damn near anyone will tell you that that house had got fucked up in the rebellion, right? And we know this wasn't the case, right? In fact, the number of homes destroyed in the rebellion, 2,509, pales in comparison to the homes that were destroyed in the most recent, foreclosure crisis. And we've had a series of foreclosure crises or federal housing policies crises that have destroyed far more neighborhoods and more homes than were ever destroyed during the rebellion. But that kind of became shorthand for what had happened. And I always like to point this out as well. During the aftermath, once the rebellion started, the amount of troops is hard to kind of understand. When I say troops, I mean local police, state police, National Guardsmen, member of the 101st Airborne Division, an elite squad of the military. There were 5,000 of those. There were 17,000 military personnel and police officers in the city of Detroit. 17,000. Just to kind of give you some context with that, when we went to Afghanistan under George Bush, after 9/11, they had less troops, they sent less troops than 17,000. Right? At least during Bush's, initial foray into Afghanistan. So consider that. And then you kind of get an understanding about why black people were talking about their communities were under siege by an occupying army. Right? So that kind of puts some of that into context. All right, so I mentioned how people thought this was a model city that wouldn't rebel. And throughout the course of this, we're going to talk about a lot of the factors that went into kind of the, what people were upset about and some of the activism that took place in the 60s. But one I wanted to talk about, because I think it has parallels for today, is that this was the period in which Detroit was in the midst of an urban renewal process, right? That is very analogous to what's going on today. It's just kind of like the reverse stages of the process. But particularly in this area, the university area, the hospital area, the medical center, if you will, and very much the same design. In many ways took damn near 50, 60 years for them to complete, right? But this was actively fought against throughout the 60s because people understood the impact that it was going to have on their communities and their livelihoods. And it created very similar conditions to today: rising rents, overcrowding, right? Particularly high black rents at the time, and poor housing conditions. Stephen mentioned before, the Kerner Commission report was commissioned while the rebellion was still going on. Right? And one thing I want to say about the report itself is that, generally speaking, like these commissions are often, as I mentioned, put forth after a period of conflict that people are trying to figure out, like, how to maintain the peace, right? So a lot of people would refer to, like, the commissions and later some of the reforms that were instituted after the fact as riot insurance, right? That they would have social programs for black people in inner cities, or even the institution of affirmative action in higher education. White leaders actually referred to that as riot insurance at that time, right? So they're trying to maintain an equilibrium so business can continue on without these kind of like outpourings of attacks against the system, if you will. But the one thing I find that's particularly fascinating about this, and I think it's analogous to today, is that while there were all these kind of like interests in trying to analyze what had happened in the long hot summers of the late 60s, you didn't have the same kind of government supervision or scrutiny of the massive racial violence that corresponded with the rise of the civil rights movement in the first half of that decade, right? There was not a commission formed to really, dig through all the Klan members, right, that were active throughout the South, all the corporate, malfeasance that was aiding and abetting that. The fact that Bell South didn't hire black people, that all these corporations down south didn't hire black people, they didn't do an analysis of the structures, right, that black people faced throughout the South. However, when black people resort to violent acts, they see it as a problem that they have to investigate. And in fact, like white violence was just seen as normative, right? And I would argue that that's what's going on today. We have alt-right and far-right groups. Shout out to U of M and your Richard Spencer protests. I appreciated that. But these clowns are going around killing people. And you wouldn't know it if you looked at the actions of the government, right now. And it's very analogous to what was happening in the 1960s in that regard. Now, we're going to talk in the course of this class about the impact of the rebellion, but I did want to point out a few things. One is, I always point this out, there's a sign. If you ever go down Warren to the east side, it's around Warren and Seminole, there's a wonderful sign in that area. It says 1967 as Detroit 1776, right? That this was a revolution for black Detroit, right? Meaning this is a perspective on the rebellion that is lost in kind of the metropolitan narrative, right? That this paved way for a degree of kind of community control in the city in a way that few white people ever had to think about or consider, right? So we'll kind of lay that out as the course of the semester goes forward. Oh shit, I lost my page. That's my second swear, Stephen. Okay, so what the hell was I talking about? It happens, people, it happens.
27 and 276.
Oh, yeah, okay, so let me try to find my place here. Okay, 16, where is that? Sorry, folks. All right, so I did want to talk about that, because we're going to look at kind of how black people interpreted the wake of that and kind of the opportunities that emerged. Carl Gregory, who Stephen pointed out before, was part of that kind of trying to rebuild the community in the aftermath of the rebellion, right? Through ICBIF and through various efforts to build affordable housing for people, right? And to gain control over that. But one aspect that I wanted to kind of point out that's analogous to today as well is that in the aftermath, I mentioned riot insurance before. In the aftermath of the rebellion, there was something called New Detroit that was formed in the city as a means to try and deal with kind of the violence that occurred and to try and maintain that kind of peace for corporations in the area to maintain themselves and to continue to thrive. And as a part of this, right, a number of black people from inner cities were hired temporarily into the auto industry. You had a number of social programs that were funded. There were people recognized, like Reverend Clegg, as political leaders who had been shunned, right? But when the rebellion happened, all of a sudden people realized they had been talking to the wrong people, right? So people got a voice, militants got a voice who never had a voice in the city prior, right? So New Detroit was this body, and it was a public-private body that was going to steer. It was extra governmental, if you will. And I mention that because it's very similar to kind of like the nonprofit industrial complex that today works around democratic notions in kind of controlling development and policy in Detroit today. So this was kind of like that body of people from private and public sectors joining together to usurp kind of democratic mores as they sought a way out of the kind of crisis that they saw with the rise of violence. And one thing I wanted to mention, and I'll leave it here, but Stephen was talking about kind of like, when people see this crisis, the way that historians refer to this is they call it the rise of the urban crisis. And they see the urban crisis oftentimes as evidenced by these rebellions, right? And I think that's a very backward way of looking at it. The crisis was that people didn't do anything and allowed it to get to that state where nobody had a chance to kind of raise a voice through political means or any other means, and had to, in order to get their voices heard, respond in a violent fashion, and that was the only way that their message got across. And with that, I'll drop the mic.
And I'll catch the mic. So now what I'll do is just take a couple minutes to go over the 8-week schedule. But the last point that David closed on launches us into that. So, as he said, historians and people at the time described an urban crisis because the cities were exploding as they saw it. And it was a crisis from their perspective because cities were not performing the function that they had previously. And the uprisings were interrupting business, and the business as usual, as someone said, and business in the literal sense. So from that perspective, it's a crisis. But David's comment calls us to see that there are other ways to envision and conceptualize what the city is and what it should be. And that's what we'll be doing throughout these 8 weeks. Next week, we'll start with that by looking at, the title is Contested Visions of the City. So cities in general, and Detroit in particular, the idea will be we'll expose and explode the notion that there's just one way to understand what a city is. And those that are currently in power, their view, their vision of what the city is and how it should move forward, what it should do in the future, is not the only way. In fact, it comes from somewhere. So we'll have exploration of different views, visions of the city, past, present, and future, to expose and critique mainstream view today and open the way for alternative visions and views and paths. That's February 13th. The next week will follow from that. We'll be looking at the land grabs, plural. Land grabs, plural. There are different ways in which different economic interests, people in power, are now and have been for some time grabbing, taking up land, whether it's tax foreclosures, whether it's Gilbertville or Gilbertvilles, the new Illegeville, land banks, various mechanisms where moneyed interests, people with power are claiming the land, various land. That's February 20th. March 6th, the week after that, equitable development, grassroots grabbing back. Look at how local communities, organizations at the grassroots level are finding ways to challenge that and claim space literally and figuratively. March 20th, Living for the People City, getting the message out, will be various ways through grassroots media and other ways that the activities that people are engaging in are being communicated. And part of that will be just infrastructure of technological infrastructure, internet and so forth. Community-based ways people are, in the city right now, are envisioning and creating ways to claim power, to share information, create means of communication and so forth. So that's March 20th. March 27th, reimagining the city, building shared economies. Yet another look at grassroots efforts to challenge, to bypass, critique, and create alternatives to our standard capitalist economic practices, which are connected to the land grabbing and so forth, and ways people are creating shared economies and other ways to meet human needs outside of, parallel to and challenging mainstream economic practices. April 3rd, we will examine another one of the major events of 1968, which was the assassination of Dr. King on April 4th, 1968. So 1 month after the Kerner Commission report was released, Dr. King was killed in Memphis, Tennessee on April 4th. Our meeting is April 3rd, which is one day before that. It's 50 years to the day after King gave what essentially was his last speech, right before his assassination. So we'll examine King and the Poor People's Campaign, which was one of his main points of focus at the time of his assassination. And there is now nationally and locally effort to create a new Poor People's Campaign. So that would be the focus on April 3rd, our penultimate class session. Our last class section, April 10th, titled Breaking It All Down, where we plan to break it all down. To review, to revisit, to bring together what we've done through the previous weeks in a way that allows us to continue the shared learning we've been doing and to see how that launches us beyond the class. And the particular focus, as the title says, subtitle, on the stage and in the streets, we plan to have a few different artists, politically engaged, community-based artists here to present their work as a way to help us break it down. So that will be the way we'll break it down, through artists. So celebrating the work of these artists and the various people in the community, various communities doing the work that we've been exploring throughout the several weeks prior. So that is an outline of what's before us. Yes, and the speakers for next week will be Shay Howe and Jamon Jordan. Both of whom have been part of speaker series in the past, and many of you in the room will have seen or worked with them in various capacities, and we will all share with them 1 week from today. Yes, am I leaving something out? Okay, so where do I drop the mic to now? Or who do I throw it to?
Throw it to you and the people.
Mama Lila.
Were there any questions for them before I?
Shay Howe.
She's with the Bog Center.
Shay Howe is a community activist with the James Gracie Bog Center, Commercial Community Leadership, and several other organizations as well.
Professor at Open University too.
We're also hoping to have Rick Schott, the former president and executive director of the North American Indian Association, which is on the west side of Detroit and is the oldest urban Indian association in the country.
All right, now we have Mama Lila. Give it up.
Okay, I'm supposed to take 10 minutes, and that's going to be a challenge, considering what we experienced. So I'm going to start by giving you an idea of where my perspective comes from. So, I was born in North Carolina on October 23rd, and I came to Detroit my mother had stayed behind. My father was working in Detroit, and after my birth, we moved to Detroit, and we were here for Thanksgiving dinner. So that says that even though I was born in North Carolina, I've been virtually in Detroit almost all my life, okay? I grew up in southwest Detroit on Morrell, which is near Fordham Junction. And at the time, that area was really the entry point for new immigrants. So I was exposed to many, many, many different cultures. My best friends were from Malta. That community was characterized by the shops had people who ran the shops, lived over the shops. So for instance, the Wiekelman's shop, there were Jewish people who lived over the shop. There was a Chinese laundry, and Chinese people lived over the laundry. There was a Chaldean grocery store, so those people lived over the grocery store. There was a number of Mexicans in the community, and there were a number of Polish people in the community, and at St. Hedwig's, that was the church. And then there was a Catholic church, Holy Redeemer. And I'm telling you this in terms of what it means to be, as a young child, exposed across cultures. And so I learned interaction. Okay, and also on the block that I lived on, there were a number of people from Kentucky and Tennessee, and our fond word for referring to that population was hillbillies. So that was a part of our culture. Also, we often went to Fort Wayne, and Fort Wayne really housed some information about indigenous people, but there were burial mounds there. And it was an opportunity to learn from indigenous people. So I had that exposure. It wasn't until long after I grew up that I realized that all of this was preparing me for now in terms of the work that I do. And so I have the honor and the blessing of living into my purpose. My mother was a uncredentialed, university credentialed social worker because she operated in terms of the concept that we were responsible for everybody in community, that we paid attention to everybody in community. Every Friday, she would prepare biscuits and serve them to the hobos, which is a term that you may not remember, but we lived near the railroad tracks. And so hobos traveling on the train used to come to our house for the biscuits. She served them on a tablecloth on the back porch. And these were all white people coming to eat the biscuits. So my frame was, you take care of everybody. You share what you have with everybody. And it wasn't until I got to college in my Sociology 101 class at Wayne State University that when they gave the data, it said that I was poor, that I lived in a poor family. And I was like, oh, I'm not poor. You know, we're giving away and taking care of and doing all of this. I'm not poor. And I still retain that perspective because poverty and one aspect of being poor is financial. But many, many people in this room are poor because they're poor in terms of relationships. If you look at the arc of who is poor and what poor really means, is what you're without. And so when we talk about a semester in Detroit, why do we have to have a semester in Detroit? Because there aren't relationships with people other than, and this is specifically thinking from the frame of the experience of being white, is that you do a drive-by, take a course in terms of semester in Detroit, and then what do you do with it in terms of developing relationships? So it's a totally different perspective when you have relationships with people who are not like you. So one of the things that I would recommend as a backdrop in terms of understanding why we are in this space is a book that was written by David Billings, and it's called deep denial, the persistence of white supremacy in the United States history and life. History is so important, and you have to understand history in terms of his story versus my story. So when you have history that's written from the standpoint of white authors, that story is going to be different and may not include the perspectives of other people. David takes the position of telling about his life as a white supremacist, and he tells personal stories. That's why I so appreciated. I'm going to mispronounce her name. Where is she? Our storyteller at the beginning, Christy Beaver. I would love for her to have shared her indigenous name, because indigenous people, when they're named, their name has a lot of power and meaning. So this deep denial is a good one for you to have a frame of what this country is founded on and how it operates out of white supremacy. And it can answer some of the questions that were raised in terms of the overview of this course. So my voice is a voice of challenge. So I want you to be challenged, because when I'm doing my work at its best, people should not leave here feeling really good, warm and fuzzy. You should feel challenged, because it takes challenge for change. So if you want to move beyond where you are and you want to benefit for the semester in Detroit, if it's just a course for you to earn credits, that's one thing. But if it's listening to, looking at, and building, then it requires you to think about, where am I, the self-assessment, and where do I want to be? And using this course as one of the ways to get there. So the challenge is for you to think about that and to ground yourself into, what does it mean to be a change agent? What does it mean to continue to participate in white supremacy and have it escalate like it has during this administration of 45? And how are you participating in the escalation? And so that I'm saying that to everybody, because white supremacy impacts us all. And there's some concepts that I can't explain right now, but white supremacy has a other part of it in terms of what happens when there's internalized racial oppression and causes people to participate and perpetuate white supremacy. So that's a very complicated concept that is helpful if you're going to go on the journey for change. I was very appreciative of the presentations, and some of the things that I was going to say were covered. I really want to point out that during my journey, I was placed in a relationship with Rosa Parks by my godfather, who, Gus Dowles, he was part of the labor movement, and he and his best friend, Shelton Taps, were in a relationship with Rosa Parks when she came to Detroit and left Alabama, Montgomery, because of life threats against her and her husband, Raymond Parks. And so in coming here, Shelton Taps and O'Neill Swanson, who is a funeral home director, really kind of shepherded her and supported her in terms of doing her work. So my godfather insisted that I assist Mrs. Taps, who was the person who traveled with Mrs. Parks. And so I had a relationship with Rosa Parks that spanned over 30 years. And in that relationship, it was something that I didn't talk about. So there was this whole surprise of my speaking at her funeral, and the backdrop was having worked on arranging her funeral. So I have had the relationship with Rosa Parks that also frames my understanding and my perspective. And the third thing I'll mention, I mentioned my mother. My mother turned 100 on October 15th last year. And her influence of doing the kind of things that she did for community, she always did it in a very humble spirit. And she and Mrs. Parks had a close relationship. Mrs. Parks, our relationship was to the point that she was at all of my children's activities. She was like a grandmother. We had a very close personal relationship. And my role was to work on programs for children 11 to 17. And her humility and the way she functioned was so much in line with my mother and my own values in terms of being in the background. So I don't love to do this, speak, but I did find when I recognized my purpose, which was about 3 years after Mrs. Parks died, I said, what I know I should not be taking with me, that I need to speak out and share them stories, because the experience of many African Americans is that their story is told by white people. And when they tell the story, it's different than the reality. And Mrs. Parks was very, very concerned about the story being told incorrectly. She was very precise, and I could tell you lots about that. But I'm saying that to say the influence of how I see this work and how I do this work has come from my life experience of where I grew up, from a multicultural perspective. I was gifted that I could understand other languages even though I couldn't speak it. And that I had for a long time, but I've lost it. And that's important in terms of when there's an opportunity for cultural sharing, how you consume the sharing, and how in our society, much of what is the intellectual capacity of people who have a lived experience is often co-opted. And a large part of the co-opters are in universities. So there's 3 questions that I invite you to explore as you listen. And that's who decides, who controls, and who benefits. So those are some ways as you consume this information, and also to push you out of staying in the mind. Culturally, white people do intellectual really well. So reading a book is really great. And they see that as, oh, I read so-and-so and I'm up on so-and-so. But real change requires you to respond through the heart, because we can see that right now there's a disconnect with humanity. And that is what is really the most painful part of doing this work, that requires a lot of activity. And Eliza and the DEAL program and some of the other national programs that I work with is dealing with the whole aspect of healing and self-care. Because we take a lot of hits in terms of what's going on. The violence that we talk about being normative, is the question would be, why is that something that there hasn't been a white response to what has been happening in terms of the violence toward people of color? Standing Rock, you know, how can we watch that? And there's no big outcry in terms of we tolerating that as normal. So I'm going to continue with the challenging statements. I know I said a lot, but I hope you took copious notes and to go back and revisit that in terms of self-assessment and say, why didn't I respond to all of these police shootings? You notice we're not hearing about that. We're not hearing about police shootings. It's shifted off the agenda. Why is that? And is that okay with you? So your silence is violence. So I'll repeat that because that's a theme I've been carrying around. Silence is violence. So if you're talking about being a change agent, you have to do that self-assessment and you have to have an action agenda. And reading books is not part of the action agenda. You have to have a heart connection with a foot connection. That means that you're going to take it to the streets. You're going to be engaged in relationship building. And you're not going to be hesitant about understanding the impact. And I did hear that there would be some exploration of impact, because many times there's intention without reality of impact. So intention may not have the impact that was intended, but it does take intentionality to address racism in a way it's not a spectator sport. I'll say that again. If you're looking for racial equity, if you're looking for change, you can't be silent and you can't see it as a spectator sport, but you're watching it and not responding. So I think that I'm going to wrap it up. Here comes Eliza. I love having a time monitor because I definitely need it always. And so I just want you to think about the historical piece, because as they were walking through history, I was thinking about how I viewed my perspective on what was shared in terms of history, and how it was there were some different nuances that I experienced in terms of 67, and also in the current reality, what I'm experiencing in terms of the reality of the two Detroits. So thank you, and I hope that you will accept the challenge and that I will see you as part of the change that I want to see, and hopefully you want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Mama Lila. I'm so glad you shared that story. I recently asked Mama Lila where she got these skills to do multiracial work and to work across cultures, because it's really painful. It's really, really painful difficult, challenging work. It's work that I do as a mixed race person. That's like, you know, I was sort of born into it. She didn't have to, you know, she didn't have to choose to do that. And she told me the story about growing up in Southwest Detroit, which is also where I'm from. So now I understand why we think so much alike, because of the things, the different cultures that we were exposed to. And it's never too late. I mean, these things, many of us were born into segregated communities. That was by design. We were by design segregated from each other to keep us divided. There's all kinds of policies that we'll continue to talk about over the course of this class, and it's never too late to start doing that work to cross those boundaries and create these relationships. And it is going to be painful. So, and people of color have been doing that painful work for, you know, in this country or in this nation, in this land, 525 and a half years, been doing that painful work. So we need other folks that are not of color to join in that with us and try to do it joyfully. Stephen Ward is gonna get us set with a couple more questions so that everybody else gets to speak.
Yes, thank you, Eliza. So we have just about 10 minutes left, so it's not enough time, but it's the time we have. So in that time, let's please, we'd like to get a few people to share concisely, please, some reflections, some thoughts you have. And also, within this time, we need to have any announcements. I know David wants to say something to his class. Marion or Craig, if you have an announcement, we're going to make sure we get those, including for those getting on the bus. So, okay, anyone quickly who would like to share a thought, a reflection, a feeling that you have from what we've done today? Shall I call on somebody?
Silence is violence.
Don't be violent. Rio, where you at? Where's Rio? I wonder what Rio's thinking. What you say, Nick? You had something you were thinking too? No? Oh, go ahead, please. I don't think it's going to make it. Stand up again. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm half Mexican and half white, and so like my whole life, I also have siblings who are Afro-Cuban and Mexican, so they look black, and I've always grown up looking white, and so for a long time, I could get away with not doing anything, and like even now, living on Ann Arbor campus, like there's always like protests and things going on, but when I invite my friends who are white, it's always like something else can come up. You know what I mean? It's always like, oh, I've got to study today. It's not a priority. And I feel like I can get away with that sometimes too because I look white and I don't have to face the same sort of persecution and as people that I actually like love do. But I can't let myself forget that. You know what I mean? Kind of.
Anyone else? You don't have to come up here. You can stand where you are.
Hi, I'm Wes Nethercott from Southwest Detroit, and I just want to put a positive spin on things. What I have observed in my short life is that they can try to segregate us, but it doesn't work. We blend. I mean, we blend. My goddaughter is Chinese, Guatemalan, African American, and European American. We blend. They can try to segregate us all they want. We still blend. So this is a very, very good thing. Thank you. That's all I want to say.
Anyone else? Thought? What's on your mind? David, you want to make an announcement also to your class?
Yeah. I wanted to talk to everybody and then a little bit to my class real briefly, but we're sponsoring an event, the Department of African American Studies at Wayne, this Thursday, excuse me, from 12:30 to 2 p.m. It's a political scientist, Clarence Lucene, who wrote a book called The Black History of the White House. And no, it's not about the Obama years. It's about the relationship of the black community towards building the White House into that general area. So I think you'll find it kind of fascinating. If you do have the time, I urge you to check that out. And for my peoples, you'll get extra credit if you do and write me a paper. And then also for my class, I just wanted to say that I teach a social movement class, and as you heard from kind of the description of some of the things that we'll be talking about in weeks ahead, this is kind of the backside. We're studying the history now, but then we're going to look at how people are attempting to apply some of the lessons that we're learning about into real time, right? So we're getting kind of the history as well as some of the attempts to learn from it and implement it in contemporary society. So beyond that, I'm good.
Thank you. Marion and Craig, do either of you have an announcement you want to make?
Only once we're done, which I don't think is just yet, but once we're done, you could help fold the chairs because the folks that need to pack the room up after you leave, it's helpful, it saves a lot of time, and throw out any garbage. But I would love to have Stephen and Eliza kind of bring a little bit more of next week and the following week into the room as a hook for coming back, of course, and continuing to build the community classroom we talked about. And there will be more time in future classes, I just want to make sure that's clear, for even some small group conversation and some more opening up dialogue amongst us. This is the last of the first night, but I just want to make sure everybody knew that. So maybe Stephen or Eliza bring us into next week a little bit more too before we leave.
Yes. So Stephen already kind of said what it's going to be about, but it's contesting views of the city. So it's about both challenging views that we have, and so like realizing that it's not just one model, and also like the fact that some of the models have been imposed on us and that they're not actually community-centered models, and that other models exist and that we have lived them. So we'll have 3 different speakers from different perspectives. So again, hoping that Rick Schott can make it to talk about, ground us a little bit more in indigenous. He's Mohawk and Mexican, and has a very long history. This is also Mohawk territory. Mohawk people, Iroquois Confederacy people, along with Wenda and Fox, and Anishinaabe people, were all here at contact when the Europeans came. So he has a long history here and a long history in Detroit. Also lived through 1967. So he'll be talking about what Detroit was before. It was before 1776, and also the urban Indian perspective, so on having been displaced and shoved off onto reservations, and then the subsequent urban relocation programs where they didn't like that people were building power out on reservations, and so they decided to dilute and try to get folks back, get the Indian population back. Things like the fact that Wayne County has the largest Native population in the state of Michigan, and yet are still invisible, and so people don't realize like how many Native people are here. So he can talk about things like that. Shay is always a visionary, so she talks about the ways that people are already building other like community-centered models of the city. And then Baba Jaman Jordan is an amazing historian of Detroit and like a critic of a lot of the models that have been imposed. So I don't know if you had any more about those, but that's basically next week. And we also have some other events through deals through the Detroit Equity Action Lab. So I don't know if you guys have any other events that you wanted to do, but tomorrow morning one of our partners, the Detroit Food Policy Council, is holding a breakfast here with Winona LaDuke, who's a major indigenous figure and was a vice presidential candidate a few years back. And so she'll be speaking tomorrow here in the Commons at 9:15 on decolonizing our food system. So we're a co-sponsor of that. And we also invite you back on Thursday night for our deal open mic. So the cultural workers will be out talking. All of us are welcome to share poetry, art, dance, song, and then we'll have featured artists who share their work and talk about why they do it. And so that'll be around 5:30 on Thursday. here again at the Commons. And then next week on the 12th, Khalid Beydoun, who's a law professor and a Muslim scholar, will be speaking on structural Islamophobia at Wayne State University Law School in the Partridge Auditorium in the evening of the 12th. So look forward to that. And there's posters in the back for the ARC, so please pick those up.
Take some of these with you to post wherever you work or live, or praise, or dance, or whatever it is on your way out.
And we still have copies of the reading there?
We still have copies of the reading also.
There's copies of the reading, which is the summary of the Kerner report. Okay, so please remember what Daryl said. This is his house and your house is our house.
I just want to let you know that the Poor People's Campaign for Michigan was launched on Monday, and there's going to be opportunities if you'd like to participate in the Poor People's Campaign. I'll make sure that you have that information so you can participate. We particularly would like to have campuses be involved.
Thank you. Please fold your chairs and open your hearts and minds.